Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Higgins, psychologist and relationship coach. And this is the Empowered Relationship podcast, where we support healthy relating, secure functioning, and deeper connection. Today, we are exploring the love formula, how to use this to address misalignment in your relationship. If you'd like to strengthen your relationship with more clarity and care, download the free relationship guide, 12 Relationship Principles to Strengthen Your Love, to practice the foundations of secure, lasting connection. You'll find powerful ways to deepen trust, improve communication, and keep love alive. And before we get started, I want to invite you to join me in taking a simple moment of pause. And if you're willing to gently gaze down or perhaps even close your eyes, and one simple way to really give some more space here is a deep inhale and a deep exhale. And if you're able to join me in this, just noticing what shifts you are observing in one simple breath here. Thank you. Let's get started in today's interview. Zoey, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, just as we've been chatting, I can appreciate just how much you devote to your work and your passion and your enthusiasm. And I was even reflecting back your desire to make a difference. So thank you for what you're doing. And I know you've developed something called the love formula. Before we get into how to describe that, how you apply it, would you be willing to share a little bit more about how this became for you?
Sure. So about 20 years ago, when I was studying criminology, I had a laser focus on human behavior and human intentions. Around that time, I was in a long-term relationship and I was cheated on. So that laser focus of criminality just instantly shifted to preserving my heart and trying to understand why I was cheated on, trying to understand why I was not lovable or loved right at that time. And then I just went down this rabbit hole and I came across something online, and that's what started the whole framework of the love formula 20 years ago. And I kept that theory in my back pocket for the last 20 years. And about 6 years ago, I'm like, it's valid. So I pushed myself to write about it. I developed the chapters, I developed the framework. Eventually, I confirmed through data analytics that, in fact, I can calculate love. In fact, we can calculate self-worth. In fact, using these calculations, you can improve a relationship, not just with your partner, but with yourself. In fact, I confirmed that it starts with you. So I confirmed that the cliche of you can't love someone else unless you love yourself is validated with numbers and with stats and with data. So that's how it all started. And this is where I've landed 20 years later.
Yes, yes. And the culmination. And I appreciate just the space that you gave it to develop, right? Sometimes we might feel the resonance and want to develop it, but also just being able to back that up by further data. And just for people listening, when you talk about numbers and research, would you like to just briefly speak to how you accumulated that?
So the foundation of the framework comes down to you can't love someone who's not a match. It won't work. The brain is not programmed in that way. The brain is programmed to seek a strong mate. If within your mind, whatever definition you have of strength, whether it's education or it's physical or whatever it may be, however you define it in your mind, if the person in front of you, the person that you've connected with within your definition and your framework does not fit those standards, your emotions will not follow. Your neurochemicals will shut down when you're with them. Your hormones, be it oxytocin or whatever gets you going, right? And those healthy neurochemicals, serotonin, dopamine, they will not activate if your brain has defined them to be less than you. So the whole foundation of the framework is that you can't love someone who's not a match. The question becomes, how do you measure a match? Well, it comes down to values and traits. You first measure yourself based on your own values, and you give yourself a score on how well you feel you meet your own values and you meet your own standards. Next, you give your partner a partner values score. So you rate them against your values. It doesn't matter what their values are. They might have a completely different set. What matters is, do they fit your standards? So now you have two scores. You have the self score, which is a numerical assessment of your self-worth and your standards, and your self-love, which is the key to everything. And I'll dive into this later because this is hands down the most important part. And next you have the partner value score, which is essentially evaluating if you respect them. Your brain is not programmed to love someone you do not respect. Your brain is programmed to love someone you think is strong. That's how we evolve as humans. Then there's a second part of the formula, which is the traits. So values is not the only thing we're looking for here. We're not just looking at whether you respect the person. We're looking at, are you attracted to them? So you give them a partner traits score. To that effect, you don't rate yourself on traits because opposites do attract. But you do rate them, and then you average out the partner value score, the partner traits score. If that total number is a match to you, perfect. But the analytics show that the perfect match is when the partner is 4% above you. And it's interesting. I did not expect that. But the interpretation of this is that you admire them and you feel lucky to be with them. Hence, when there's a breakdown of the relationship, if you guys fight, whatever it may be, you're more to put your best foot forward because you feel lucky to have them and you don't want to lose them.
So for people listening, and my understanding of your formula is that two people could rate their partner differently. So both partners optimally, and I guess in your formula, both people would rate their partner that 4% favorable, and that would be more optimal, that you appreciate their values and their traits, and or the match on values and their traits.
Exactly.
Before we move into attachment dynamics, I want to name that attachment patterns are adaptive strategies shaped by early experience, not character flaws. As you'll hear, we're exploring how certain dynamics feel in relationship and how to discern whether a relationship is secure and mutual.
Let me pitch to you a scenario. What if you view your partner as, let's say, 5% above you? That means that you admire them. That feels that you feel very lucky to be with them. If they, for whatever reason, in their minds have decided that you don't quite meet their standards, whether those standards are fair or unfair, the humans are nuanced. Everyone will have their own framework, their own checkboxes. But if they think that you're, let's say, 10% under them, what's going to happen is you may become a self-sacrificer in that relationship. You may become infatuated. You may put in more effort than them. And I don't know if this sounds familiar, but if you learn about the avoidant anxious dynamic, that's what it resembles. It resembles someone who is afraid to lose the other person and just gets anxious, not knowing whether they them back. And then the avoidant is a person who's they avoid the relationship, they avoid the dynamic. In my opinion, we've labeled the anxious avoidant dynamic to situations where when someone loves you a lot, they're not going to lose you. They're not going to want to lose you. That's how in my years of experience, that's what I've noticed. Someone who truly cares about you will not put you back on the market.
Okay, so I don't fully disagree with you, and I also do think that there are variables. So where I would agree with you is this sense of someone who is not as invested or doesn't value the relationship or their significant other is more primed to not turn towards, right? And how these relationship dynamics manifest. And also, I having done my dissertation and really have done a lot of work with the EFT and the attachment research, I do know from very early on, people have certain strategies in the way that they protect themselves. So where I will say is that it could look similar and that the origins, but I think where there could be real indication is someone interested in repair? Is someone making the effort? So even though their perhaps first tendency is to be a little bit more contained, well, I'll just use myself here as an example. So my husband does have a little bit more of that contained, that more protective, which could be labeled as avoidant tendencies. And when I took risks early on in our relationship, he did turn towards me. He did really respond, and he does show effort. He does invest, and I know he values me. So I want to say yes, and the attachment research, I think, has a lot of value. And what you're really presenting is, it kind of reminds me of, he's just not that into you.
Yeah.
Like, let's not make a bunch of excuses and reasons. Like, if someone is not valuing, that's going to be demonstrated, and let's be real about that.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that you said that, because I agree with you. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The truth is we all have learned to love in a certain way. I guess where I'm coming from is I see so much myths online about the runner chaser, for example, and people justifying being treated not so well and being undervalued. And then thinking it's okay that I'm a self-sacrificer. You know, there's a meaning behind this, and this is just their attachment style. That's what scares me. There's so much information online that can validate their thoughts that no, this person is into you. And from the research that I've seen, from the analytics, that doesn't seem to be the case. I'll give you an example. So for the couples who are currently together, the partner score was 4% above them. Okay. The group below them, the partner score was -5%. -5%. They were in an on and off relationship. So if you look at anxious avoidance styles, and of course, you're the expert here, that this is just from my general understanding. So please correct me if I'm wrong. The anxious avoidant, if it's not checked, if there's not enough education behind it or knowledge behind it, that can very easily fall into the trap of an on and off. And from the interpretation here, it's that one person put in effort, they felt like the other person was not putting in effort, and in that case, the values score dropped. So the number one value that we saw across the board was dependability and reliability. As an avoidant, if you're gonna bail when things are not right, from the analytics, from what I'm seeing in the interpretation, it's that they start to lose value in the eyes of the person doing the calculations. So it actually turns into, you are not good enough for me. You're an avoidant. It turns into, eventually, you're not my rock, and I can't be in a relationship where you're not a rock. So, chicken or the egg type of scenario, but at some point, they're not a match.
I'm so glad you're saying this, because I do think that this is important to acknowledge that someone's perception, or so in EFT language, they might say view of other, or even in the Gottman language, they might say the sentiment, the positive sentiment override or the negative sentiment override. And when we look at the importance of secure functioning, that is the consistency, the reliability, and the availability. Is someone engaged? Are they responsive? And are they available? So what you're looking at, I think, absolutely correlates with the research on attachment and all the other research that I don't know if you're incorporating or if you're looking at your primary research and how you've interpreted that. But absolutely, right? If someone's not responding or showing up, that's not a secure functioning relationship, and that's hard to sustain. And when we look at attachment, it's very difficult for those. And I don't know how long your relationships were as far as in and out, but typically it's hard to sustain the avoidant, anxious dynamic.
Exactly, exactly. I think we're mostly saying the same thing, just different angles, right? And different terminology. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you though, that if there is education behind it and knowledge, and you can read between the lines, especially with an avoidant who's scared, and you can read between the lines, oh, this is a protective mechanism, right? Or a defense mechanism. Then yeah, then that can certainly make you stronger if you gently communicate it, and hopefully they'll be open to communicate with you back. That key though, the knowledge there, though, if it's not there, then it's just going to break down. And once again, yeah, the analytics showed that it becomes a mismatch at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to be able to access vulnerability and to be able to access connection, if there's not an ability to repair, then there's not other things that are supporting, again, that more secure functioning. And this reminds me, your formula reminds me back in undergrad, I believe, when we look at the old school ways in which people partnered, it was people who were of similar attractiveness or of similar SEO status, or there was a similarity of compatibility of how people were ranking value around maybe more traits. I mean, that was more retroactive research, right? Just how people are partnering, but it seems to go along with what you're describing here.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I compare the values, right? And in the formula, I essentially give room for flexibility on what you're attracted to, because opposites can attract. But the analytics actually showed that people tend to be more attracted to who they are, to what they are, their essence. Here's how I know this. I developed personality type dichotomies. Okay. There's one in particular, which is the diversified versus the alike. The diversified is the opposites attract, right? The alike is I want someone who's me, traits wise. So there's the healthy alike and the extreme alike. So healthy alike is just a little bit leaning towards alike, but not overly. And then the extreme alike is I want that person exactly me. The healthy diversified is the one who's open to nuance and differences in personality and essence. And then there's the extreme diversified, which is I just want exact opposite to me and whatever. The relationships who were currently together were healthy alikes and extreme alikes, not the diversifieds. And I did not put that in my analytics because I labeled it extreme. So I didn't want to give the impression that it's not right or that there was something wrong with it. But no, the analytics show that the more the person is you, traits wise, the more you're likely going to be with them. In fact, I had a situation where I became a diversified. It broke down. Oh, look at this. We're so different. How fun. And it didn't work.
Well, again, I so appreciate just what you're bringing in. And I'm aware of, as I mentioned, the Gottmans, they talk about every relationship has some differences that pose, in my language, curriculum for working on how to work together. So that's the one that's on time, the one that's a little more spontaneous, or the one that's the saver, or the spender, or the extrovert, the introvert. So I know you speak about these things. So I think some of that will exist. And I think in David Schnarch's world, it was that this can provide some erotic tension, right? You don't always want to have same. But to your point, you're saying there's a likeness that really does support. There's a lot that offers when people are aligned on values. And then would you give some examples? Because people might associate values and traits, but how are you looking at, would you give some examples around what those are?
So values are essentially lifestyle choices, and it's what determines respect, what you respect in other people and what you respect in yourself. Whereas traits, those are characteristics that you're inherently drawn to. They can be physical traits, they can be humor, intelligence. These are the things that you can't necessarily change. So just to give an example, Jessica, if I told you a joke, can you help whether you find that funny or not? Can you really help it? It's hard, right? It's very automatic. It's very instinctual. That's what traits are. Traits are not necessarily decisions where it's like, I choose to be attracted to that person. And sadly, this is why some of us fall into destructive relationship patterns. It's because if, for example, You grew up in a dysfunctional home that becomes your wiring. It's something that you are inherently drawn to. It's what's familiar to you, right? Doesn't mean that's what you want. It just means that's what your mind and body, for whatever reason, has decided this is familiar, this is comfort zone.
Yes.
Right. So with traits, one thing I say is you can be drawn to destructive traits. That does not necessarily mean it needs to be the end all be all. You can stop yourself in your track and stop that pattern, right? You might be drawn to it because, again, can you really help what you find funny? To the same extent, can you help what makes you horny? Can you, though, right? Can you help what turns you on? Can you help? Your body knows what it wants before your brain can say, no, 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 we don't want that. No, 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 we're trying to stop this shitty ass pattern, right? But with that, this is why you have a brain. We are not animals, right? We are humans. We make decisions, right? Maybe our free will. Sometimes it's difficult at times to tap into that because our bodies have its own formula and mechanisms to what it wants. But you can stop yourself and say, no, I don't want this. So going back to the traits, sometimes the traits are in conflict with the values. If your value is dependability and reliability, which again, we saw that as number one across age groups, across all relationship types. But what if one of your trait preferences is emotional unavailability? Not because you're choosing it, but because you've seen yourself falling into a pattern of being attracted to that. Well, there's a huge conflict there.
Yes. Talk to us about that, because I was aware, and that seems a really important thing to bring light to. And I appreciate, just as humans, that we have conscious choice, and that you're inviting people to recognize there's different pools or tendencies inside of us, and that we can really be in more discernment about what we're aligning in. So for one that recognizes, oh, to the point of emotional unavailability, I wouldn't consciously say that I want that trait or I value that trait. Yet, if I look at my patterns, I keep choosing in with someone who's emotionally unavailable. How do you help people work with that?
So self-awareness is obviously the first step. By doing the formula, when you're listing out your values and your trait preferences, the goal is not to put numbers that you think you want to have or values you think you want to have, or you have to be honest with yourself. If you have trait preferences, and the best way to determine the trait preferences is to watch your pattern. What do you keep falling into? So if you start to determine that you have trait preferences that are destructive, the next time you meet someone, it's, oh, that person falls exactly within the trait preference that I have. But from experience, this trait preference is not sustainable. I will not be in a happy long-term relationship if I find someone with this trait. That's where the human brain and our emotional intelligence kicks in, and where free will kicks in. But they have that thing, though. They have that edge that I'm constantly getting in trouble with. And catch yourself. You don't have to go for a second, third, seventh date. You can say, for now, I choose not to do that to myself, and I choose to make better decisions for myself. So the self-awareness is very important. I will also say, though, very quickly, if it's okay, tapping back into the anxious avoidant.
Yeah.
An avoidant will be emotionally unavailable. And the thing is, with dynamics and the way the brain is programmed,
I think it's a really powerful reinforcement when we look at intermittent reinforcement, that's the most powerful reinforcement. So we look at casinos, or you don't know when you're going to get actually positively responded to, or you're not going to get responsiveness. That's the most compelling dynamic. I might have made a face because from a research perspective, we categorize, but I think humans typically live a little bit more on a continuum. So I think people who have avoidant tendencies, I wouldn't say they're not like binary, not emotionally vulnerable or available. I feel there's ranges of people's availability, and the way they've interpreted that is, I'm broken, shame, I'm not enough. So what often lives in their internal state is, I'm afraid to turn towards because I think I'm going to mess it up, or I am going to hurt the person. So again, I think there can be layers here, but I do agree with you. If the pattern dynamic is always the superiority or the power differentials, you have age differences, you have money differences, you have different ways in which people feel a sense of power. And when that continues to be prevalent, I would agree with you. Absolutely. The person that's a little bit more anxiously primed is trying to understand, trying to check for stability, trying to feel safe. And the way they interpret is typically like, ooh, they don't care, or they're not into this, or they might leave. And then the hypervigilance of overfunctioning or trying to make it work. So I do think there's a real validity to what you're describing, and just I'm adding.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I love that you're bringing the academic understanding and perspective and insight. I guess when I say avoidant, what I mean to say is that their behaviors are matching and very alike to people who are emotionally unavailable.
Yeah.
And regardless, the way I understand it, whether you're an avoidant and truly not functioning in a proper way when it comes down to demonstrating love and communication, whether you're truly an avoidant or emotionally unavailable, if you're connecting with that person, something in your subconscious will ping, I'm not good enough, regardless of what their intention is, regardless of the reason,
The
regardless
interpretation,
of the
yes.
interpretation, their dysfunction, whether they think they're better or not better, regardless of that, what's happening in your brain is what's most important. And if your brain is saying, oh, shoot, they are better than me, they're bigger than me,
I need to perform better. I need to be perfect.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. That's where the issue arises, right? Now, again, I've come across an avoidant where there was a protective little conversation that happened, and I could read between the lines. I saw between the lines thing, and I'm very glad that I did. But I was able to communicate in a way where he snapped out of his avoidant tendencies, right? But with that said, there's no way, if I didn't have this knowledge, that I would have known whether he's emotionally unavailable or avoidant.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't caught myself, my brain would have
Absolutely.
said, I'm scared, I'm out, I'm anxious, oh shoot, what the fuck just happened, right? So I was lucky that I had that knowledge, but all to say, it's that signal, and it's your subconscious that you have to be solid with and strong with. And that's the discernment of knowing what your values are, your trait preferences. And if you happen to have trait preferences where you attract, call it avoidant, call it emotionally unavailable, however it's affecting you is what you need to pay attention to. And that's what I would suggest. Don't spiral into a new relationship like that.
Yeah. Well, and I can appreciate that this and lived experience is confusing because sometimes the data points aren't always like, they might show signs of availability, or then they might not be available. And to your point about having consistency and reliability, that can get painful. And just to clarify, when you said earlier, let's say in this dynamic, the one that's a little bit more anxious is working hard to keep things stable or engaged, over functioning. And then at some point, they start to devalue because that partner's not showing up, and then something switches, and then they're now maybe initiating distancing or breaking up or withdrawal because of what you're describing, that they are now valuing less the way that that person's showing up.
Exactly. Because what we're seeing is that the number one value across the board is dependability and reliability.
Yeah.
People want a rock.
Yes.
So eventually, if the avoidant, or however we want to frame that, if they're lacking consistency, they're not able to validate their partner, they're not able to communicate well for whatever reason, at some point, the other person will say, it's not good enough for me. It's not sustainable. So when the partner score is under less than 5%, just 5%, these people tended to be in an on and off relationship. It still wasn't stable. And then below that was when the partner score was minus 10%, that would be a mutual breakup. And the interpretation there is that one person gets lazy, then the other person stops putting in effort. Then there may be fears of, why would I invest in this if it's so unstable? And then it's a mutual breakup. It's like, this isn't going anywhere. So maybe at some point it started off positive. I sincerely believe that at some point all these couples who were together and then eventually broke up saw something special in them. Scores fluctuate, especially in long-term relationships, marriages. When you meet someone, you're like, oh my God, right? And you might give them a high score and you might feel very lucky. And then over time, you start to see layers of the person and how they treat disagreements, or maybe you start to see their misalignments. And if you've been with them for long enough, you might say to yourself, well, why would I leave? We have attachment now. We're attached. Our friends know about us. We have a routine. That's attachment. But then over time, especially in marriage, and I understand it, especially if there's kids and mortgage involved, like I totally get it. But sometimes it just falls into misalignment. But one more thing is that this tool and this framework can get you back into alignment. It's a tool for communication. What are the values? How do you score yourself? How do you score your partner? Work on that. Forget about the fights. Forget about all the things that have happened between you guys. Just list out your values. Tell your partner how you rate yourself. Tell your partner how you rate them. Be soft.
Yeah.
Not a tool to bully.
Yes. I want to talk about that. I would love to hear more about that. I also want to just, if I'm hearing you in long-term relationship marriages, that perhaps people don't break up, but the misalignment is creating a lot of dissatisfaction or disconnection. So it might not be an actual breakup at times. It might just be disconnection and not feeling. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example, actually. My husband. So a year into our marriage, we were completely misaligned. We were not seeing eye to eye. We were not doing great. And I'm literally a relationship expert. Why am I not using this framework in my own relationship? I always hesitated doing that because I didn't want to feel, oh, I know everything. But we got to a point where it's, if this does not get addressed, we're both unhappy right now. So we did it together, and I gave him a lesser score in dependability and reliability compared to when we met, when we were engaged, all of that. He gave me a lesser score for communication stuff. I was a little sharp. My communication was not patient. I lost patience. So neither of us went into why. Kevin didn't say, hey, I stopped being dependable or reliable because of X, Y, and Z. I didn't tell him that my communication style sucked because X, Y, and Z. Instead, we just said, here's where you are. Here's where I would like you to be. Can we work on that together? And we did. And he became more of a rock in the relationship, what I wanted as a husband to receive, right? And I was softer with him. I became softer and kinder and more gentle, which is what he needs to feel respected. So little by little, we started building our respect and our scores, right? And I will say also, when you're in a marriage, because when we did the formula together, I think it was our 6-month mark. He was above me, slightly above me, and I had a strong score in his mind as well. When we did it again 1 year into our relationship, I'm like, oh, this is not a man who's attracted to me right now, or who feels I'm matching his values. And that scared me a little bit, because I'm like, I want my husband to enjoy me. And this is what he needs. Just a gentler communication style, which is not unfair. And I think that he had that same stark realization as well, because as a husband, he wanted to feel like a man. But when he started to realize, hey, the scores are dropping here. And again, we didn't go into why. We just went into, let me fix it so I could show up as that spouse that I want to be. So it came down to pride as well. It's like, no, I'm not going to be that wife. I want to be better. And same with him.
Well, it sounds like zoning in and getting very, very clear about what matters, and having a tool that helps show that more vulnerably or make that more visible. And also the reality check, right? That sometimes when there are interactions that don't go the way we want them to or feel challenging, then we just might think, oh, we just need to resolve those things, when actually it's whittling away at our attraction, our love, our respect. That's notable. So to have a real honest conversation, and that is a wake-up call.
It really is. And the best wake-up call is that the couples who are together see their partner as 4% above them. So all to say, don't get lazy. If you care about your relationship, if you want to care, not just your relationship, if you care about yourself, if you want to be happy, if you want to feel fulfilled, if you want to gain that attraction back, if you want to feel attractive and desired, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to be admired?
And values typically, they change a bit, but they often are very connected to what matters most. So I think,
absolutely.
Paying attention to that. Okay, so I know we don't have a ton of time, and you had mentioned the importance of self-love or self-worth. Can we talk about that a little bit? And maybe you're mentioning it here, like our happiness, our well-being, to not compromise, to really be in touch with. But tell us more here.
Okay, so this is literally the most important part of the framework. And I didn't realize that this would become the biggest revelation of the framework. Okay, so let me back up a tiny bit. The average self-score for women is 76%. The average self-score for men is 73%. So that's essentially the baseline. The couples who were currently together had a strong self-score. They had a higher self-score than the average, or just about. Okay. What that means is that the ones who were broken up, either in an on and off in a mutual breakup, or they were broken up with, had a lower self-score. In other words, you need to have strong self-worth to be in a sustainable relationship. There was one group above the currently together group with an even stronger self-score. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I want to normalize being single. These people did the breaking up. They chose not to settle. And they're 78% self-score average. They're notably higher than the average self-score. All to say, if you're in a relationship and you're unhappy and you're afraid of what family will say, what friends will say, what community will say, what social media will say, if you happen to break up and, oh my God, well, the world will fall down and who am I going to be?
I'm never going to find anyone else.
Never going to find it. Actually, the analytics show that you will be more fulfilled than all the groups.
Even if you don't find someone.
Even if you don't. Which is, I loved seeing that, especially with women. We put so much pressure on ourselves in our 30s. Oh, get married, have the kid, have a mortgage, have the wedding so the parents can be happy, so that you can fit in with your social media friends. Excuse my language. Fuck it. We need to let that go. And we need to normalize it. Normalize being single. And the analytics are showing that you're in a better position. Putting that aside, though, for the couples who are currently together, you still needed a strong self-score. You did. So what that means is if you're harping on someone, whether it's a breakup or someone that you wish that you could have, it's got nothing to do with them. Work on yourself. Work on yourself. Your confidence will radiate. You will glow. And if this person doesn't want you, you'll say, I don't care. I'm going to move on and find my other. And so literally that self-score, I did not realize that this whole framework would validate that you don't need anyone to be happy. But if you do want someone, you have to be happy within yourself. Because if you have a lower than average self-score, you won't make it.
And you're likely to put up with a bunch of stuff, BS, that is perhaps destructive and harmful to your well-being. You're going to be having a low standard.
That's exactly it. If you have a low self-score, let's call it a 70%, that means that you will accept someone in your life who's also a 70%. Okay, a 70% is not someone that, by definition, through the data, that you respect.
And these are not huge differences in percentages.
They're not. We're talking 1% to 2%. So for women, 76% is the average self-score. For men, it was 73%. But then the on and off relationships, I think it was down to 72, then to 71, then to, I think 70 was the lowest. And the 70 was when they were broken up with. But even then, the partner score, by the way, was minus 25%. All to say, think about how bad that partner was treating them.
Right.
That
to warrant that score.
How bad did it get?
Yes. Well, and this is where,
and then you were broken up with after all that. You were
right.
Get out.
Right. I think the percentage difference is, I'm curious what you would say because you've been immersed in this, but my first blink on it is that someone could think they have a relatively high self-esteem or self-worth because I'm successful in this area and I'm successful in this area. And yet they're still saying yes to really unhealthy dynamics that it maybe isn't that far. Just those percentage differences are huge.
So what happens if you're killing it in life? You respect yourself so much. You give yourself a 90%, okay? But you grew up a certain way. And now your familiarity and your comfort zone is, let's say, emotional unavailability. Although those are the values that you seek, that you work on so hard, your trait preferences may be in conflict. Now, what happens if you are more emotional than practical, i.e., you are more traits focused, traits leaning, than values leaning when you determine what you want in a relationship?
And your decision making.
Right. So the people who are currently together tended to fall in the healthy emotional zone, which means they're traits leaning. The ones who were traits focused, which means all the way traits only, not enough of the values when determining who's a good partner, did not sustain the relationship. Okay. If you are not either close to the middle or slightly towards practical, slightly towards emotional, and either all the way in the extreme, you're not going to sustain it. And you're still, regardless of how hard you work on yourself, how hard you work on your peace of mind, your success, your social network, your strength, your image, your health conscious, doesn't matter. If you're more traits focused and even one of those traits is destructive, boom, you've fallen into a bad pattern.
So what does someone do as we're winding down? You're leaving on a cliffhanger.
Self-awareness, write it out. Ask yourself, why am I so good to myself and yet I can't find a partner who's good to me? Write it out. It's probably not in the values. It's probably in the traits. There's something in the traits there. Either that or you think you need to be a hero to self-validate. And if that's the case, snap out of it. And I say that with love because I used to be there, right? So everything that I say, it's always out of love because I've been there, but I kicked my own butt to get myself out, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I come off a little.
You're being very directive and you're being clear and you have a lot of evidence to support the dangers of being in misconception or fantasy and really calling out and giving people a real skillful tool to work with that can assist them to align.
Yeah.
How can people get in touch with you and what you're offering?
Okay, so you can find my website, lovecanininfactbecalculated.com. Otherwise, I'm on social media, Instagram and TikTok at Zoey Charif, ZoeyCharif. And yeah, and if you want to pick up the book, it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
And will you say the name of the book one more time?
Sure. It's called Love Can, In Fact, Be Calculated.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yes, I enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.